From Canadian Food Focus, this is Ask a Farmer. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, a Saskatchewan farmer. In this podcast, we talk to food experts to answer your questions about your food. Here we are with the Ask a Farmer podcast, and we have Erika Stewart with us today to talk a little bit about the Verified Beef program. Now, before we kind of get into a little bit more of the program, I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself, Erika. I know we've had the privilege of walking with you at Pine Ranch over the last couple of years on Canadian Food Focus, but maybe just give us a little bit of a background of your ranch and your family, and just help all our listeners know a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Clinton, and thanks for having me on the podcast today. So my name's Erika Stewart, and I'm a third-generation rancher, and we currently ranch in Moore, Saskatchewan. My husband, Kyle, and I and our three girls ranch alongside my parents. We have about 300 mother cows, and then we grass some yearlings as well.
So, Erika, one of the things that I noticed, and I watched really all of your videos that you have on Canadian Food Focus, but one of the things that I really take note of is the fact that you have three little girls and they follow you around, jump up on the horse with you. You have them strapped to your chest or your back, depending on what you're doing. How does that actually work? I know you and Kyle are committed to your cattle, but also obviously very committed to your three little girls.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so fun having them with us. And we try to take them with us as much as we can. Sometimes that means that we are not very efficient. Kyle actually calls us the efficiency crew. So usually efficiency goes down when we come and help. But yeah, it's just, we love ranching. And the neat thing is you can do that with your family. I mean, it is getting a little bit harder now that they're getting a bit older. When they were younger, like you said, like they were on our back or on our front or whatever. And carriers are the best invention ever. But it is getting harder in a way. But then they're asking more questions and they want to be outside with us. And all of them are just, they have their own cows and they know their numbers. And so just trying to hopefully provide them with an opportunity to know agriculture and hopefully love it like we do. And it's such a fun thing to do, all of us together too. We just appreciate that we have that opportunity to, essentially take our kids to work with us every day.
It is interesting because it just sparks that interest of growing food in their lives and in their hearts. And I think back when I was, around their age, I used to play farming with my brother now, who I farm with. It really kind of just feeds that passion for agriculture. Yeah,
absolutely. It's pretty fun and special to grow up like this. So we're just trying to provide that for our girls too.
So you're not originally from Saskatchewan, though. Maybe tell us a little bit about the story of how crazy it was to move from some beautiful winters out in British Columbia into Saskatchewan.
Yes. Winters are different out here than what we're used to, that's for sure. So I'm actually originally from Merritt, BC. I grew up on my family's ranch there, the same ranch my dad grew up on. Our first daughter was born there, and it was a place that, was very much a part of me and I loved very much, and just always thought that we would raise our family there and I would live there. But we made the really hard decision in about 2016 that it was just where we were located anyhow. It was just too hard to ranch there. So we started looking for places out here, which was actually a really fun experience. We got to see a lot of Saskatchewan and actually see places, so it was really fun. But then it got a bit stressful. Our ranch sold and we didn't have a place yet. So we had to be out by April 22nd to 2017, and we had no place for all of our cows or us. But then we did finally find a place in Morris, and we hauled all of our cows out here, equipment, belongings. Moving a whole ranch was quite a interesting time.
I can't even imagine. So I've moved a few times. The first few times I've moved, I could fit everything in the back of my Plymouth Acclaim, right? And so it was everything I owned kind of fit in a suitcase. So moving a farm would have been one heck of an experience, right?
Well, and going through the shop, dad's tools, how many crescent wrenches do we have? Or do we need this? Or, just that. Yeah, it was a lot.
Quite the ordeal.
Yeah.
We want to talk a little bit more about the verified beef program, and maybe if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of what the program is to help everybody understand what it is. And then we'll talk about some of the kind of reasons around why the cattle industry decided to implement it.
So the verified beef program, or the verified beef production plus as it's called now, is the quality assurance program for the Canadian beef industry, essentially. And so when it first came out in like the late 90s, the whole focus was food safety. And then in 2016, with the inception of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the verified beef program, because we are actually a certification body for the CRSB, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, we wanted to make sure that our program fit the CRSB's definition of what actually sustainable beef is. So then there were 3 new modules added, and that's why now it's VBP Plus, or the Verified Beef Production Plus program, just to include those new modules. So the new modules are animal care, biosecurity, and environmental stewardship, along with the initial module of food safety.
Maybe what we could do is just talk a little bit about each of those 3 components of it. So the first one is around animal care. So do you want to just kind of walk us through what that means for a typical rancher here in this country?
Each module has standard operating procedures that are taught in the training. So the first step of the Verified Beef Plus training would be to actually take the training, and it's offered online all the time. Or a big part of my job as the provincial coordinator in Saskatchewan is to organize in-person workshops. So times that I can go around the province and deliver the training in person to producers. And the point of that training, or kind of what happens, is I would go over each of those modules and the standard operating procedures that are required by the program for each of those 4 modules. For the animal care component, it's a lot like any of the requirements of the beef code of practice then become a requirement of the VBP Plus program.
Okay.
And so most of these are things that most of the time producers are already doing, right? We want to make sure we're providing animals with shelter in extreme weather conditions. We want to make sure we're providing them access to quality and quantity nutrition and water. So most of these things are common practices, but the Verified Beef program just helps maybe formalize them or give actual protocol to producers to follow.
Are you an auditor, actually, I should ask?
No, definitely not. The program's made that quite distinctive. So I am the provincial coordinator. I'm the first point of contact for producers, and my role is education. So I'm there to teach the training, to make sure producers are prepared for their audit, but I'm not an auditor. In Saskatchewan, we have 3 trained auditors in the province. So they actually go out and do the audit, just so there's that clear distinction, right? If I was helping educate and train and being an auditor, we could say could be a little bit of gray area there. So they want to make sure the audit process is rigorous, and it would be the same findings that we would find in Saskatchewan on an operation and in BC and in Ontario, because VBP Plus is a national program. So I am not an auditor.
So that's interesting. So I think a lot of people sometimes think the auditing of these programs is done by those who are kind of teaching the program. And it's nice to see that there's that division to make sure there's independent auditors, that if there is, things that need to be improved upon on different ranches or in feedlots, that it actually takes place.
That's exactly right. We want to make sure our program is rigorous and we're able to provide a standard and make sure that, producers are doing that standard.
This kind of gets into the consumer side of things. So we work a lot with the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. And one of the studies that just came out this last year was talking about consumers' views or beliefs on different pieces of the food system. And one of them is around the humane treatment of animals. And it's interesting because when you look at the numbers, there's a lot of conversation, I think, about people, say, switching their diets. But within the numbers, it shows fairly clearly that the vast majority, and 96% of Canadians, still consume animal proteins. But what's concerning is the level of Canadians that actually don't believe animals are raised humanely. And the figure that came out was roughly only a third of Canadians actually feel that animal agriculture raises their livestock or poultry humanely. So based on this then, Erika, do you feel that this is a program that kind of drums up a little bit more of that support for the humane treatment and the care of cattle here in this country?
Yeah, I think that was one of the goals. So one of the focuses of the program is to instill consumer confidence in Canadian beef and how we're raising that beef. So I think that does align. I do just want to say, kind of before I get into the verified beef answer, if that's okay, like when you say that stat, that actually like hurts my heart as a producer myself. If you think about it in terms of that, this is my career. This is what we strive to be better at all the time. And we take a lot of pride in producing beef for our family, for families in Canada and around the world. So just to hear that consumers are that unsure about how we're treating animals is, yeah, like actually like hurts a little bit. I mean, I just think about our ranch and the things that we do on a daily basis. Like the animals are the priority. When it's cold out, like the last 2 years, calving season's been hard. We calve in April, so you're hoping green grass and a little bit of sunshine. But we've caught some really bad snowstorms at the end of April and it's cold. We're out there. We're trying to make sure that those calves are okay. We're up at all hours of the night. We've actually taken to wearing ski goggles. They become really handy when it's cold and windy out. I just find that, like, I guess, fascinating. And I think it's good. Like, don't get me wrong. I really encourage people to try to ask questions about how their food's being produced and raised. That's good. Like, I'm all for that. But I just think if you have questions about it, try to dig a little deeper and find out. Don't just, believe the first thing that comes up on your social media feed, because there's a lot of organizations out there that are actually anti-animal agriculture. They have agendas. They have big budgets to try and stop this. So, when you hear something, I just super encourage like a little bit of critical thinking, or find another side to the argument, or ask a producer. There's lots of producers out there like myself who are just passionate about what we do and telling our story, and like, we're just doing our job, but then we're trying to share our story on social media. And there is quite a few people out there. So I do encourage that, because you see those numbers and it's a little bit hard to see when we're here doing it in -40, water's freezing. Well, when water freezes, it's usually really cold, but then we're out there trying to make sure we can get it thawed for them because we know they need water. Or a nice hot vacation in Mexico sounds lovely in Saskatchewan winters, but we can't do that because we have cattle to feed. So I would just, love somehow for that side of the story to get out there a little bit more and just be able to, tell consumers what we're actually doing.
You talk about the trip to Mexico. So we have a layer farm on our farm back in Lanigan, Saskatchewan, and we have, similar to a lot of poultry or swine farms when they're in confined agriculture, that a lot of sensors that are in our barn. And a sensor went off when my brother was in Mexico, indicating that the barn was starting to get a little cold, and kind of came up with the sensors. And I went back through actually a closed highway. Highway 16 was closed, but I drove through it because I knew I had to get back to that barn, in an effort to close down some vents where the electric winches had frozen up, and there was a strong north wind blowing into the barn. And of course, you kind of risk your own life and make sure that things are okay with the animals in the barn. So I'm with you on that one. I see that, and it kind of hurts me, because I think of, so again, we're close to the Yellowhead Highway. So 2 out of every 3 vehicles that go by aren't too sure whether or not, we're producing our animals humanely. And that's a tough pill to swallow, right? So
yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I can kind of circle back and answer your question. If you, no, I wasn't trying to get out of it. The short answer would be, programs like BBP Plus are trying to help consumers maybe understand what we're doing and provide that verification. So in the verified beef program, there's 2 streams. So there's a training stream. So that's the one I talked about initially, was just providing producers with continuing education or opportunities to learn more or new things that are coming out in the egg industry or the beef industry. And then there's a certification stream. So all of this is voluntary. So if producers take the training and want to implement those requirements of the program on their operation, then they can request the on-farm audit. And I think that the word audit is a little bit scary for producers, makes them a little uneasy or unsure. But we hope that that word is also comforting for consumers. So it means there's been a third party verifying humane treatment of animals, that they're in compliance with the beef code of practice, and that they have these protocols in place on their operation, but then take it a step further because we also require records, like treatment records. And so this one I find very interesting and something I like to share about the program, because I think it really, the VBP Plus program really provides a good framework to discuss this. So there's a lot of negative narrative about antibiotics, not using antibiotics in animal agriculture. And so again, I think that's another good one. If you see the commercials, you hear the negative narrative, maybe just ask a producer what they do. Do you use antibiotics or why? Personally, we do when something's sick, but I want to be able to have that ability, just like I want to be able to take my kids when they're sick to the doctor, and if needed, get antibiotics to treat whatever infection they have. So with products in Canada, well, like our vet products, everything has what's called a withdrawal time. So if an animal on our operation has a minor infection, we might use a common product, oxytetracycline. If I give them a shot of it subcutaneously, so under the skin, the withdrawal time is 42 days. So on all of our vet products, there's these withdrawal times, and they can be measured in days or hours. And so it's the time that when after given an animal health product to the time before that animal can be processed for human consumption. So if we adhere to that withdrawal time as producers, which we do, all meat is antibiotic free. So I think that's a really interesting piece to this that doesn't get discussed enough. And so with verified beef, we talk a lot about responsible antimicrobial use. And then one of our record requirements would be anytime you treat an animal that you record it. So we would require all producers to record the date the animal was treated, the animal's identification, the dose and route, so how much they were given according to the labeled instructions, how it was given. So it can be given subcutaneously, so under the skin, or some in the muscle. And again, it tells you on the products. And then the withdrawal time. And so that's really important. So we're producers that are certified with the program are proving that they're recording this information. And again, most like producers are doing this. We're just taking it a step farther and actually having them record it. And then that's one of the other things the auditor would verify when they're doing their on-farm visit, is they would actually look through those records and make sure that everything that we require is there. And then another record we require is called the shipping record. So before a producer sells their animals, we require them to go through their treatment records to make sure that none of those animals they're selling is inside a withdrawal time. I mean, some producers have a lot of cattle. We don't want things to be forgotten. So this is just another step where they would check those treatment records and check off this group of cattle that I'm selling today. None of them are inside a withdrawal time. So again, we're just putting protocol in place to make sure there's no chance of residue in the beef for consumers.
See, it's interesting when I think about this. I think that this is kind of similar to the My Health records that I have for myself and my family, right? And it's very thorough and something that goes back to verify to consumers what's actually going on in the cattle industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I guess the opportunity the beef industry is trying to respond to consumers saying they want a certified sustainable product. So this is the opportunity for that as well. I mean, the beef industry is doing these things anyhow. These are common protocol, but it's just if a producer wants to make sure and buy products that have claims on them like this is an opportunity to do that. So we're trying to listen to what consumers are telling us too.
Exactly. And you think of how the industry has evolved over time. And here we are at a state in really the world today where the consumers are demanding certain things from us as producers of food. And we have to listen to what they're saying to make sure that we provide the products that they want. So it's great to see the uptake on this. So I think we're going to do a fun farm fact. Did you know that the Canadian grasslands sequester the same amount of carbon as taking off 3.62 million cars from the road? Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, it's truly amazing.
The fun farm fact kind of gets into the next kind of area of conversation that I want to talk about, and it's the environment. So when I say that the grasslands are sequestering this amount of carbon, from your perspective, how many consumers do you think actually realize that here in this country? We have 40 million people roughly who live in this country. We have a lot of land that obviously cannot be used for crop production. I'm just kind of curious. Have you had some conversations with individuals, especially maybe back in British Columbia, that did not realize what an environmental benefit the cattle industry is to our country?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so interesting too. These narratives saying that cattle are bad for the environment. And then you hear a stat like that. And without these cattle, we wouldn't have these grasslands and they wouldn't be sequestering that amount of carbon. So again, I just find that fascinating. And it's just the other side. There's missing parts to these stories that are being told right now. And yeah, I have had those conversations. I'm fortunate enough I actually went to university in Edmonton, to the U of A, and I played rugby there. And I'm so grateful for it because I met a lot of people outside of agriculture that I wouldn't have before. So I feel like sometimes we do a great job of telling our story to ourselves, but I feel we have trouble breaking out into consumer space and where we need to be. And they've really helped me realize that, I guess. We'll have conversations and they'll say things like that, like, well, but beef's bad for the environment. And you're like, what? And I feel like I've done a terrible job as a rancher friend, but to have those conversations, and they've made me really cognizant of we're at a good starting point, but we do need to still make a lot of ground to get that message out there to the people in the city that it's not their fault. They don't have a connection with agriculture. So just, trying to be cognizant of that and really help to reach out and help fill that gap. Because if we don't provide our side of the story, somebody else out there is. So I just think we need to be in that space as well.
It is interesting too to kind of think of the history of this continent too. Before European settlers came over and it was just the indigenous people here on this land, what controlled the grasslands, right? Like it was the bison.
The bison.
Yeah. So you look at the ruminants that were doing the job back then, and we have the ruminants doing the job right now. So it's great to see.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you had mentioned with the VBP Plus program is the environmental side of the program. Do you want to just expand a little bit on that? Holistically looking at sustainability, how does this environmental side come into play with VBP Plus?
So there is the environmental stewardship module portion of the program. And a lot of that module, like we're wanting to make sure that we're conscious of our practices. And say if we're storing manure to compost it, it's not beside water, like for runoff or leaching issues. But I mean, most of that's being done because as farmers or ranchers, we're working with the land, and lots of these operations are generational operations. So we have to have been taking care of the water and land. So another portion of it would be kind of more continuing education, I guess, like providing producers opportunity with, what are some new grazing management practices that are happening that are contributing to improved soil health, which, if there's a healthier plant and soil health is improved, then we're actually taking more carbon out of the air and putting it into the ground. So what are we doing for grazing management? What could you improve a little bit with there? And the Verified Beef Program, the national program, has actually just launched a new website that is going to house the verified beef training, but also we're hoping it can be a hub of continual learning or courses for the beef industry. And then you mentioned BCRC before. So BCRC has great webinars and great resources for producers to just, make sure they try and stay current with what's going on. Because we're in like an amazing age and time where research is changing all the time, and we can find out information so easily and then easily adapt them to our operations or learn a little bit here and see what works for our place and try things. Yeah, because it is truly amazing what's happening right now and the research that's going on, or even different species of grasses to plant or grazing practices, like I've said, or there's some government programs that can help with water management. Like you can fence out that dugout and put in a water system that'll actually help put on more pounds of beef for your cattle and protect that riparian area. Because that's the thing about these grasslands too, like they're home to so many other species, and lots of times species at risk. So us as producers and ranchers, if we have good grazing practices, it actually helps the other species on these grasslands too.
So Erika, I hear a lot more when it comes to just general food production and waste, right? So we're looking to different portions of the industry to kind of reduce our waste of what we produce for food. Based on a lot of what we've talked about, what are some of those ways that the cattle industry is actually proving to be a waste reducer?
I think that's such a great question, Clinton, because that's another side of this story that I don't think is being shared enough. When they talk about eliminating animal agriculture or, that's going to help save our planet, in reality, beef production in Canada only represents 2.4% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that's a really interesting fact that I don't think that's large enough to try and get rid of it altogether. And then, like you're saying, if we did get rid of animal agriculture, how much more food waste there would be. Because I don't know if people realize how great of a job cows do at actually upcycling food products that can't be used by humans, whether that be the grasslands, because most of the areas that cattle are grazing are areas that cannot be used for crops. But then also there are feedlots right now that are using waste from the groceries. I shouldn't say waste, but produce that isn't going to be used by humans. So maybe it's a little bit off or it's not the right shape. It's not appealing. That can be fed to cattle, obviously alongside nutrition consultation, because all these feedlots have a nutritionist. We have a nutritionist to work with. So we're making sure that the cattle are getting what they require in their diet. But isn't that a really neat attribute of cattle, that they can really help us eliminate food waste? So if we got rid of them, we would just have all these other parts of the food chain that aren't being used, that's just wasted. Last year in my area, we had a terrible drought. And so feed was really scarce to find. And we actually sourced some pea powder. So I was just listening to a very interesting podcast with Diana Rogers about this. And she said that for every 1 pound of protein that's produced from plant sources creates 4 pounds of waste. So if that's a huge number, but cattle can use that. When we grow a plant, the only part humans are using is the protein part, but cattle can actually use the rest of that plant. So I thought it was very ironic that we were feeding our cows byproducts from these plant-based products, but it was a great protein source for our cattle. So it just goes to show how cattle can really be there to support and upcycle these products that would be wasted otherwise into a super dense, high quality protein for humans.
See, the way I look at it, and I grain farm, we have a lot of grain land. My goal at the end of the day is to get Canadian #1 milling wheat or malting barley or peas or whatever it happens to be that we're growing. But nature doesn't always work that way. And I don't always get #1 Canadian grade on those products. And without having a source to have my barley or feed wheat go into a feedlot or a hog operation, whatever it happens to be, that's waste, right? And I think therein lies some of that, trying to make sure people understand the full food system that goes on in agriculture and how it's really interconnected. Like your ranch is connected to my grain farm, and it's connected to the local fertilizer and ag chemical dealership, right? So there's a lot of interconnected cogs to the wheel that go around. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So I want to thank you, Erika, for being on the program today and talking a little bit about the Verified Beef Production Plus program that's really implemented throughout Canada, and how that is really an assurance program, not only for farmers and ranchers here in this country, but gives consumers a little bit more of a background and comfort knowing how their cattle are being raised and grown for food in this country. So we want to thank you, and we want to encourage all the listeners to look at your numerous videos that are on Canadian Food Focus. I know I've taken the opportunity to watch actually all of them, and I absolutely love watching not only your family grow, but seeing the different positives and negatives that are happening on your ranch. So thank you very much for taking the time to be a part of this program.
Well, thank you very much, Clinton. Thanks for having me today. I really enjoyed our visit today.
I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our Ask a Farmer podcast. We at Canadian Food Focus value the input from our listeners and ask that you share this podcast with your friends and family. Remember, this is a two-way street, so we seek your input for future segments that are of interest to you about food and farming. To do this, please click on the Ask Us icon at the top of our website, canadianfoodfocus.org. While you're there, feel free to follow our numerous social media links and sign up for our newsletter. This segment was produced and edited by Angela Larson, research and writing by Dorothy Long and Penny Eaton, music by Andy Elson. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, and from all of us here at Canadian Food Focus, we wish you good health and great eats.